I died on the cold marble floor of my own hotel, choking on my sister's betrayal and the dark, rotting secret of room 308. But when I gasped for air, I wasn't dead. I was 22 again, sitting in the lawyer's office. This time, I smiled and let her take it all. Let her burn. The smell of lemon polish and cheap stale tobacco hit my senses like a physical blow. I gasped, my hands instinctively flying to my throat. There was no blood. There was no crushing weight on my chest, no agonizing pain of a fractured windpipe, and most importantly, no sight of my sister standing over me with that cold, dead-eyed smirk. Instead, I was sitting in a stiff, high-backed leather chair. Across from me sat Richard Abernathy, our family's estate lawyer, adjusting his tortoise-shell glasses and looking at me with mild concern. To my left sat my younger sister, Chloe. She was dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, playing the role of the grieving granddaughter to absolute perfection. "Clara, are you all right?" Mr. Abernathy asked, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. "I know this is a lot to process. The sudden passing of your grandfather is a tragedy for the whole town of Ashwood." I stared at my hands. They were smooth, uncalloused, and trembling. I wasn't 32. I wasn't the exhausted, broken owner of the sprawling Gothic monstrosity known as the Whitmore Hotel. I was 22. It was the summer of 2014 again. The day the will was read. I had been reborn. A tidal wave of memories crashed over me. The first timeline. In that life, when Mr. Abernathy asked who would take on the burden of the Whitmore, I had proudly stepped up. I wanted to honor Grandpa Arthur's legacy. I spent 10 years pouring my blood, sweat, and youth into that aging Victorian hotel. I missed my 20s. I missed falling in love, traveling, living. And Chloe. She took her half of the inheritance in liquid cash, traveled Europe, partied in Ibiza, and came back broke just in time to demand a slice of the hotel's newly generated profits. But it wasn't the money that killed me. It was room 308. Grandpa Arthur had left one strict, non-negotiable rule in his will. The third floor is never to be renovated, and room 308 is never to be unsealed. For years I obeyed. But in 2024, facing a massive property tax hike and relentless pressure from Chloe, who had convinced the local zoning board we were hiding taxable square footage, I finally broke the padlock. I didn't find old furniture or hidden treasure. I found the mummified remains of Daniel Gallagher, the son of the most ruthless, connected family in upstate New York who had vanished in 1994. Beside him was a ledger tying our grandfather to a massive money laundering syndicate. Chloe found out before I could go to the police. She tipped off the Gallaghers, pinned the entire cover-up on me, and watched as their hitman choked the life out of me in the lobby to silence me forever. She got the life insurance payout and the sanitized hotel. I got a shallow grave. "Clara." Chloe's voice dripped with fake, sugary concern. "You look pale. Maybe you aren't strong enough for this." I know Grandpa Arthur left the choice of the hotel to both of us, but we all know it's too much work for a fragile thing like you. I turned my head and looked at her. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her Prada bag resting on her lap. Bought on credit she expected me to pay off. In my past life, her condescension had sparked my pride. I had fought tooth and nail to prove her wrong. This time, I felt nothing but a cold, crystalline calm. "You know what, Chloe?" I said, my voice steady, startling both her and Mr. Abernathy. "You're absolutely right." Chloe blinked, her practiced mask of sorrow slipping for a fraction of a second. I'm right?" "Yes," I nodded smoothly, leaning back in the chair. "Grandpa's will states that whoever takes the hotel gets the property and the business assets, and the other sibling gets the remaining liquid estate, which is about $300,000, the cabin by Lake George, and the stock portfolio." "Well, yes," Mr. Abernathy stammered, flipping through the heavy parchment documents. "But Arthur specifically hoped you, Clara, would take the helm. You have the business degree. You practically grew up helping him at the front desk." "The hotel is a massive liability," I said, reciting the exact flaws I had spent 10 years fixing in my past life. "The boiler is from 1982. The roof in the east wing sags. The plumbing is a nightmare. It requires a visionary to bring it into the modern era." I turned to my sister, injecting my eyes with feigned admiration. "Chloe is the visionary. She has the aesthetic eye. She has the social connections. I would just drag it down with my boring spreadsheets. Chloe should have the Whitmore." Silence hung in the dusty office. Chloe stared at me, her eyes narrowing as she searched for the trap. But greed is a powerful blinder. All she heard was that I was handing her a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate, completely debt-free, while I settled for the modest cash reserve. "Well," Chloe said, sitting up straighter, a smug, self-satisfied smile spreading across her lips. "If you really feel you can't handle it, Clara, I suppose I must step up for the family's sake. I have so many ideas. A spa, a rooftop lounge. It'll be the premier destination in the Catskills." "I'm sure you'll do exactly what's necessary," I said softly. Mr. Abernathy looked deeply troubled. "Clara, are you certain? Once you sign the relinquishment forms, you have no legal claim to the Whitmore Hotel. You will have no say in its operations or its future." "I'm certain," I said, reaching for the Mont Blanc pen on his desk. I signed my name with a flourish, feeling a literal weight lift off my chest. I wasn't just signing away a hotel. I was signing away my death warrant. Let Chloe deal with the rotting pipes. Let Chloe deal with the insufferable local unions. And most of all, let Chloe deal with whatever the hell was waiting in room 308. The transition was brutal and immediate. Within a month, Chloe had completely upended the Whitmore. I took my $300,000, moved into the quiet, sturdy little cabin by Lake George, and invested the rest in a few tech stocks I knew from my past life were about to skyrocket. For the first time in either of my lives, I slept in past 6:00 a.m. I drank my coffee on a wooden porch, watching the morning mist roll off the water. I got a job as a remote consultant, keeping my head down and my hands clean. But small towns talk, and Ashwood was no exception. I didn't need to be at the hotel to know exactly what kind of disaster Chloe was brewing. First, she fired Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins had been the head housekeeper for 25 years. In my past life, keeping her on was the only reason the hotel hadn't collapsed under health code violations in my first year. But Chloe thought Mrs. Higgins was too old-fashioned and clashed with the modern vibe. Chloe replaced the veteran staff with cheap, inexperienced college kids from the next town over, pocketing the difference in payroll to fund her lavish lifestyle. Then came the cosmetic renovations. I drove past the hotel one afternoon in October to pick up groceries and saw it. She had painted the beautiful historic mahogany, trim a sterile, cheap-looking stark white. She had ripped out the vintage lobby chandeliers and replaced them with gaudy, industrial chic exposed bulbs. "Your sister is making a right mess of the place," a gruff voice said. I turned in the grocery store aisle to see Chief Deputy Miller holding a basket of produce. He had been a friend of our grandfather's. In my past life, he was the one who found my body. Seeing him alive, breathing, and looking at me kindly made a lump form in my throat. "It's her hotel now, Chief," I said gently. "She has her own vision." "Vision?" Miller scoffed. "She's got 3 citations from the fire marshal already, bribed her way out of them by schmoozing with the mayor. And now she's bringing in the Gallagher construction crew for some massive overhaul. Arthur must be spinning in his grave." My blood ran cold, then immediately burned hot with anticipation. The Gallaghers. "Gallagher Construction?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah. Sean Gallagher's boys. Cheap labor, rough crowd. Rumor has it she's opening up the 3rd floor." There it was. It had taken me 10 years of desperation to finally break Grandpa's rule. It had taken Chloe less than 6 months of greed. The 3rd floor of the Whitmore was historically used for long-term boarders back in the 70s and 80s, but it was sealed off by our grandfather in the late 90s. He told everyone it was asbestos. In my past life, I discovered there was no asbestos. There was only room 308, reinforced with a heavy steel door and 3 industrial padlocks. Chloe was arrogant. She saw the 3rd floor not as a sealed danger, but as unused square footage that wasn't generating revenue. She wanted to build a luxury penthouse suite up there. A week later, I received a glossy, embossed invitation in my mailbox. "You are cordially invited to the grand reopening of the Whitmore Hotel and Spa. Join us for a VIP reveal of the exclusive 3rd floor penthouse." She couldn't resist. She wanted me there to rub my face in her success. She wanted me to stand in the lobby, in a cheap dress, looking at the empire she had built, regretting my decision to hand her the keys. I RSVP'd. Yes, immediately. I wouldn't miss this for the world. The night of the gala, Ashwood was blanketed in a biting November frost. The Whitmore was lit up like a beacon, a massive searchlight sweeping the sky. Valets were parking BMWs and Mercedes belonging to local politicians, minor celebrities from the city, and, of course, the local heavyweights. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, subtle but expensive, bought with the dividends from my newly blooming stock portfolio. As I stepped into the lobby, the noise was deafening. A string quartet played over a thumping bass track. Waiters carried trays of champagne. And standing at the bottom of the grand staircase, wearing a backless crimson gown, was Chloe. She spotted me instantly. A predatory smile stretched across her face, and she practically glided over, flanked by a few of her sycophantic friends. "Clara, you came," she announced loudly, ensuring several guests turned to look at the poor, sensible sister who had given up the golden goose. "I was so worried you'd feel too out of place. It's a bit different from your little swamp cabin, isn't it?" "It's beautiful, Chloe," I lied smoothly. "You've certainly put your stamp on the place." "I have," she said, her chest puffing out. "In fact, revenue is projected to triple once the penthouse opens tonight. Speaking of which, I'm doing the ceremonial ribbon cutting for the 3rd floor in 20 minutes. You really should come up to the front, Clara. I want you to see what real ambition looks like." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, taking a flute of champagne from a passing tray. As she walked away to schmooze with Mayor Thomas, my eyes scanned the room. Leaning against a marble pillar near the bar, nursing a whiskey, was a man who made the hairs on my arms stand up. Dominic Gallagher. I was the current head of the Gallagher family's legitimate businesses, and the older brother of Daniel Gallagher, the boy who had gone missing in 1994. In my previous life, Dominic was the one who had given the order to have me killed when I tried to expose what I found in room 308. He was ruthless, untouchable, and had spent 20 years quietly tearing the county apart, looking for his brother's remains. And right now, he was standing in the lobby of the very building where his brother had been rotting for 2 decades. Chloe grabbed a microphone, the feedback whining shrilly before she stabilized it. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. Tonight marks a new era for the Whitmore. For 20 years, the 3rd floor of this historic building has been closed off. My grandfather, bless his cautious heart, thought it was too much to maintain. But I say, why limit ourselves?" The crowd politely clapped. Dominic Gallagher didn't clap. He just stared intently at Chloe. "My contractors have been working tirelessly all week," Chloe bragged, clearly intoxicated by the attention. "We've cleared the old debris, and tonight we are officially unsealing the master suite at the end of the hall, the legendary room 308. Follow me upstairs for the grand reveal." The crowd began to murmur in excitement, slowly making their way toward the grand staircase. I stayed near the back, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In my past life, it took me hours of sweating with heavy bolt cutters to get into room 308, and I had done it in the dead of night, alone. Chloe had hired contractors to do it. But knowing Chloe, she had likely instructed them to crack the exterior locks and leave the final push for her grand, dramatic reveal in front of an audience. She had no idea what was waiting on the other side of that door. As the wealthy elite of Ashwood crammed onto the 2nd floor landing and trickled up the narrow, freshly painted stairs to the 3rd floor, I caught Deputy Miller's eye. He was on off-duty security detail, looking intensely bored. I subtly moved closer to him as we reached the 3rd floor corridor. The air up here was different. Despite the heavy smell of Sherwin-Williams paint and floral perfumes, there was an unmistakable faint undercurrent of something else. Something sour. Something I remembered vividly from my first life. It was the smell of dry rot, old copper, and death. Chloe stood at the end of the hallway, right in front of the heavy steel door of room 308. A thick red ribbon was strung across the doorframe. The massive industrial padlocks had been cut off by her crew earlier that day and were sitting discarded on the floor. "This room," Chloe projected her voice, beaming at the cameras flashing around her, "has been a time capsule since 1994. Tonight, we open the door to the future." She grabbed a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors from a velvet pillow held by an assistant. Dominic Gallagher was standing near the front of the crowd, his arms crossed, watching her with a blank, unreadable expression. "Do it," I thought, taking a slow sip of my champagne. "Open the box, Chloe." With a dramatic flourish, Chloe snipped the ribbon. The crowd cheered. She grabbed the heavy brass handle of the steel door, pressed her shoulder against the metal, and pushed. The door groaned, its ancient hinges screaming in protest. A rush of stagnant, freezing air blew out from the dark room into the crowded, overheated hallway. And then the cheering stopped. The cheering died in the throats of the town's elite, replaced by a collective, horrified gasp. As the heavy steel door swung inward, it didn't reveal a dusty, forgotten time capsule of 1990s luxury. It revealed a tomb. The blast of stagnant air that hit the crowd was so potent, so overwhelmingly foul with the distinct metallic stench of decay, that Mayor Thomas visibly gagged, pressing his handkerchief to his face. The bright flashes of the local press cameras illuminated the gloom, capturing the nightmare in stark, high-definition terror. Sitting in a high-backed floral armchair in the center of the room was a slumped, skeletal figure. The dry, frigid air of the sealed third floor had essentially mummified the corpse. The leathery skin was pulled tight across the skull, dressed in a faded, oversized 1994 grunge-era flannel and a leather jacket. Pinned to the jacket, right over the ribcage, was a rusted ice pick, and resting on a small, scarred wooden desk beside the armchair was a thick black leather ledger. For 5 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The string quartet downstairs was still playing a lively rendition of Vivaldi, the music drifting up the stairwell and clashing violently with the deafening silence of the third-floor corridor. Chloe stood frozen, her hand still gripping the brass door handle. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her spray tan looking sickly and orange against her pallor. The oversized ceremonial scissors slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. "What?" Chloe whispered, her voice a fragile, trembling squeak. "What is this?" Then the crowd parted. Dominic Gallagher didn't run. He walked. His heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway as he pushed past a paralyzed city councilwoman and stepped up to the threshold of room 308. He didn't cover his nose. He didn't flinch. His cold, dark eyes locked onto the mummified corpse in the armchair. Specifically, his eyes locked onto the heavy, gold signet ring hanging loosely on the skeleton's right index finger. A ring bearing the Gallagher family crest. "Daniel," Dominic breathed. The word wasn't a shout. It was a guttural exhale of 20 years of grief, rage, and unanswered questions. He turned his head slowly, his gaze shifting from his dead brother to my sister. The look in his eyes was so fundamentally terrifying that Chloe stumbled backward, tripping over the ribbon she had just cut, and fell hard onto the floorboards. I didn't know," Chloe shrieked, scrambling backward like a crab. "I swear to God I didn't know it was in there." Chief Deputy Miller finally snapped out of his shock. "Nobody move," he bellowed, his hand instinctively resting on his service weapon. "Back away from the door, everyone. Back down the stairs, right now. This is a crime scene." Pandemonium erupted. The wealthy elite of Ashwood abandoned their champagne flutes, trampling over each other to flee the stench of death and the looming wrath of Dominic Gallagher. Women screamed. Men shoved. I didn't run. I stood perfectly still, pressed against the flocked wallpaper of the corridor, watching the trap I had carefully laid spring shut with absolute perfection. "You!" Dominic snarled, stepping out of the room and looming over Chloe. He grabbed the fabric of her expensive crimson gown, hauling her halfway to her feet. "My brother has been rotting in your family's hotel for 20 years, while you served drinks downstairs, while your grandfather smiled at me and took my money." "It wasn't me," Chloe sobbed hysterically, her perfect makeup running down her face in ugly black streaks. She looked around wildly, her eyes latching onto me. "It was her, Clara. She's the older sister. She owned it first. Ask her." Dominic's terrifying gaze flicked to me. Chief Miller stepped between us, putting a firm hand on Dominic's chest. "Gallagher, back off, now. Let the police do our job." Dominic released Chloe, letting her drop in a pathetic heap, but he didn't break eye contact with me. "Is she right?" I stepped forward, my posture relaxed, my voice a picture of calm detachment. "Mr. Gallagher, my sister is panicking and looking for a scapegoat," I said clearly, ensuring Miller's body camera and the remaining press microphones caught every word. I have never owned this hotel. I signed away my entire legal claim to the Whitmore estate during the reading of the will 6 months ago. I have not set foot on this property since. I looked down at Chloe, allowing a flicker of profound disgust to cross my face. Grandpa Arthur left strict, written instructions in his will that the 3rd floor was never to be opened, I continued. Chloe chose to ignore that. Chloe fired the veteran staff. Chloe brought in the unpermitted contractors to cut the locks. I am simply a guest who received an invitation in the mail. Chief Miller nodded firmly. "That's the truth, Dominic. Clara here took a buyout. Chloe is the sole proprietor of the Whitmore. Her signature is on every permit and payroll check." Dominic looked at Chloe, who was hyperventilating on the floor. His expression hardened into a mask of pure, lethal calculation. "Then I guess I know exactly who I need to talk to about my brother's missing ledger," Dominic whispered. Chloe looked at the desk inside the room. The black ledger. The very book that, in my past life, detailed our grandfather's systemic theft from the Gallagher syndicate, the theft Daniel had discovered, which cost him his life. Chloe owned the building. She owned the business. By law, and by the unforgiving rules of the underworld, she owned the sins hidden within its walls. The fallout was catastrophic, rapid, and heavily televised. Within 24 hours, the Whitmore Hotel was entirely cordoned off by state police and the FBI. The discovery of Daniel Gallagher's body was a media sensation, but the contents of the black ledger were a nuclear bomb. It detailed a massive money-laundering operation, tying Grandpa Arthur to rival crime families, essentially proving that the foundation of our family's wealth was built on stolen Gallagher money. In my first life, I had uncovered the ledger alone. I had tried to be a hero, tried to go to the authorities discreetly, and Chloe had sold me out to save her own skin. This time, she had broadcast the evidence to a room full of reporters, politicians, and the mafia boss himself. Chloe was arrested 2 days later. The charges were staggering: reckless endangerment, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence, as she had ordered her crew to illegally breach a sealed room without municipal oversight. But the legal trouble was the least of her worries. Because Chloe had aggressively claimed the hotel as her sole asset, demanding 100% of the profits and taking full legal responsibility, the state froze everything she owned. The IRS descended like vultures, auditing the estate based on the ledger's findings. Her bank accounts were locked. Her credit cards were declined. I sat on the wooden porch of my cabin, overlooking Lake George, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, sipping hot chamomile tea. A fire crackled in the fire pit, and my laptop sat open on the table, displaying the latest article from the Ashwood Chronicle: Whitmore heiress faces ruin, hotel to be demolished. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. Dominic Gallagher didn't need to hire a hitman to choke my sister on the marble floor of the lobby. He used his immense wealth and legal teams to systematically bleed her dry. He sued her civilly for emotional distress, wrongful death liability, and restitution of the stolen funds documented in the ledger. Since Chloe had gleefully signed the paperwork, making her the sole inheritor of the business liabilities, she was on the hook for millions. They took her car. They took her designer bags. And eventually, they took the hotel. 2 months later, I drove into town to pick up some supplies. I parked across the street from the Whitmore, or what was left of it. Wrecking balls had already torn down the east wing. Dominic Gallagher had purchased the foreclosed property for pennies on the dollar, solely for the satisfaction of razing it to the dirt. As I stood watching the dust billow into the grey winter sky, I saw a familiar figure standing near the chained-link fence. Chloe. She looked a decade older. Her hair was unkempt, her roots showing dull brown beneath the faded blonde dye. She wore a cheap, oversized winter coat, shivering in the wind. She was out on bail, awaiting a trial that was guaranteed to end in a lengthy prison sentence. She turned and saw me. The sheer venom in her eyes could have melted snow. She stomped over to me, grabbing the chain-link fence separating us from the demolition site. "You knew," she hissed, her voice ragged and broken. "You knew something was up there. That's why you let me have it. You set me up." I looked at her, my expression utterly void of sympathy. I thought about the feeling of cold marble against my cheek. I thought about the terrifying inability to draw a breath while she watched me die in our past life. "I didn't set you up, Chloe," I said softly, my voice barely carrying over the roar of a bulldozer. "I just got out of your way. You were so desperate to take everything for yourself, you never stopped to wonder why it was so easy." "I have nothing," she screamed, tears of frustration spilling over her red cheeks. They took my money. I'm going to jail, Clara. My life is over." "Yes," I agreed, adjusting my scarf against the chill. "It is." I didn't offer her a hand. I didn't offer her money. I just turned my back on her and walked toward my car. The sound of the wrecking ball, smashing into the grand staircase, echoed through the town of Ashwood. It was a destructive, violent noise, but to me, as I drove back to my quiet cabin by the lake, with a second chance at life and a clean slate, it sounded exactly like freedom. Did you love this story of ultimate revenge and second chances? Sometimes the best way to destroy your enemies is simply to hand them the shovel and let them dig their own grave. If Clara's brilliant trap gave you chills, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, gripping Reborn stories. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you were reborn? See you next time.